these are quite properly legal terms that must be determined by international courts. But I do agree with the Honourable Gentleman. Those terms were largely used when millions of people lost their lives in crises like Rwanda, the Second World War and the Holocaust. And the way that they are used now undermines the seriousness of that term.
I can't speak to the total death toll, but there are reports of 24 children killed in this incident. No doubt a number of them are children who have been fleeing the effects of this war for more than a year now. We have reached out to the government of Israel to ask what happened here. We don't yet know the underlying circumstances. We have not gotten a full explanation from them about what happened. But you step back and look at where we are in this campaign.
So the rogue regime of Israel, led by psycho and war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu, has finally banned UNRWA, an important arm of the United Nations working for 6 million Palestinians living in Gaza, the occupied West Bank, East Jerusalem, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. The ban on UNRWA imposed by the Israeli parliament means that the agency's headquarters in East Jerusalem will be closed down and its staff will not be allowed to engage with Israeli officials. I will talk about the catastrophic impact on the Palestinian population in the region, but let's look at how the Western leaders have reacted to another criminal act by war criminal Netanyahu. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who usually has heart attacks whenever Israel is in pain, tweeted this, and I quote, "The UNRWA bills passed by Israel's Knesset are gravely concerning. This risks jeopardizing the international humanitarian response in Gaza. We need to see an immediate ceasefire and the release of hostages. Israel must ensure sufficient aid reaches civilians in Gaza." End of quote. So no condemnation, no anger aimed at Netanyahu for this barbaric act, just concerning. Job done. Many people say, there has been a lot of social media chatter saying that Starmer is just listening to his Jewish wife to support Israel. But I didn't believe this, thinking that this was just a conspiracy theory. This guy has been a career human rights lawyer. So for him to stoop to this low is truly shocking. War criminal Anthony Blinken has chosen to not react at all. At all. Why should he? You don't expect an Israeli national to go against the decision of his own country's parliament. Congratulations, America, for having a rogue criminal as your Secretary of State for the last 4 years. Well done. Another feather in your cap, in your country's cap. Be proud. You deserve such pathetic low life as your Secretary of State. Blinken's spokesperson, Matthew Miller, started his daily press briefing today not by any response to the Israeli parliament's anti-humanity legislation, but the conflict in Sudan.
Start with some opening remarks. Over the last week, the Sudanese Rapid Support Forces has carried out a major and brutal attack across eastern part of the Al Jazeera state in Sudan, located just to the south of Khartoum.
So much for the Western civilization. When pressed by a reporter, all Miller said was that the development was deeply troubling and the US was now going to see how Israel will implement this legislation. Israel has decided to slaughter more Palestinians, but the US will just monitor how Israel carry out these slaughters before deciding if there will be any consequences.
Let me start by just reiterating that we are deeply troubled by this legislation. It could shutter UNRWA operations in the West Bank, in Gaza, in East Jerusalem. It poses risks for millions of Palestinians who rely on UNRWA for essential services, including healthcare and primary and secondary education. UNRWA, of course, plays a critical role in providing services to Palestinians in Gaza, the West Bank, and throughout the wider region, and particularly in Gaza. They play a role right now that, at least today, cannot be filled by anyone else. They are a key partner in delivering food, water, and other humanitarian assistance to civilians in Gaza that wouldn't have anyone else to get it from if UNRWA were to go away. So we have made clear our concerns over this bill. We have made clear our opposition to this bill. As the Secretary said in his letter, and as I reiterated yesterday, there could be consequences under U.S. law and U.S. policy for the implementation of this legislation. We are going to engage with the government of Israel in the days ahead about how they plan to implement it. We're going to watch and see if there are legal challenges to the law and if there's any impact by those legal challenges. And then we'll make our decisions after looking at all of those factors.
As I said, the ban on UNRWA will have catastrophic impact on the broader Palestinian population living in the region. You have to understand the role that UNRWA plays. They are not just a relief agency. They do a lot more than that. They are the lifeline for Palestinians in the region. They provide relief materials, they run schools, healthcare facilities, and even pick up their daily garbage. UNRWA members are responsible for collecting whatever relief materials that Israeli terrorists allow to enter Gaza from different checkpoints and distributing them amongst Palestinians. So first, Israeli terrorists blocked the entry of aid materials into Gaza, and now they have passed a law banning the interaction of Israeli terrorists with UNRWA staff at those checkpoints. Meaning, Palestinians will further suffer. More and more Palestinians will be starving to death. As I speak, a genocide is already taking place in northern Gaza in Beit Lahia. Israeli terrorists have just slaughtered more than 100 innocent men, women, and babies in one single strike. Israelis have already been carrying out summary executions after separating men from their family members, and yet this clown David Lammy, who is the Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom, has a problem with people calling out the Israel's genocidal campaign.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today, as on other occasions recently, we've heard comments from the benches opposite that suggest that Israel is somehow conducting a war of annihilation, extermination, and of genocide. There is obviously much suffering in Gaza, and we all accept that, but this terminology is completely inappropriate, not accurate, and is repeated by the protesters and the lawbreakers who are intimidating British Jews, as we saw again this weekend. So will the Foreign Secretary take this opportunity to say that there is not a genocide occurring in the Middle East?
Foreign Secretary.
These are quite properly legal terms that must be determined by international courts. But I do agree with the Honourable Gentleman. Those terms were largely used when millions of people lost their lives in crises like Rwanda, the Second World War and the Holocaust. And the way that they are used now undermines the seriousness of that term.
US State Department spokesperson's reaction is simply blood-boiling. Just watch him answer the pointed question on the latest act of genocide by Israel in Beit Lahia. And tell me if this makes any sense to you.
Maybe just stepping away from the UNRWA issue per se, I wonder if you have anything to say about the Israeli strike today in Gaza. I think the latest death toll that we've reported is nearly 100 by eyewitness accounts. Many, if not most, appear to be civilians, children. I know you don't speak for the government of Israel, but as Israel's, you have anything to say about this?
We are deeply concerned by the loss of civilian life in this incident. This was a horrifying incident with a horrifying result. I can't speak to the total death toll, but there are reports of 24 children killed in this incident. No doubt a number of them are children who have been fleeing the effects of this war for more than a year now. We have reached out to the government of Israel to ask what happened here. We don't yet know the underlying circumstances. We have not gotten a full explanation from them about what happened. But you step back and look at where we are in this campaign. We are a year into the government of Israel's military campaign in Gaza. And Israel has decimated Hamas's military capabilities. It has decimated Hamas's leadership. It has, through its military action, ensured that Hamas does not have the ability to repeat the attacks of October 7th. And all of that, getting to here, came at great cost to civilians in Gaza, which is, of course, often the case when civilians are caught in the crossfire in conflict. And so that tragic cost to civilians continues today, quite notably in this strike, which seems to have claimed significant civilian life. And it is another reminder of why we need to see an end to this war.
Now you know why Israelis have been against UNRWA right from the day one. Israeli terrorists accused UNRWA staff of being involved in 7th of October attacks. There was no evidence then, there is no evidence now, but the backers of Israeli genocide, namely the US, the UK, the EU, Canada, and Australia, was so quick to stop UNRWA funding despite knowing the catastrophic impact their decision will have on the Palestinians. Two different inquiries proved that Israelis had no evidence to justify their allegations. Whilst other countries have now resumed their funding, America didn't, because the great civilized parliament of this country, called the Congress, passed a law altogether to ban any future funding to UNRWA. That was because the US Congress has been reduced to an extension of the Israeli parliament. There is a broader issue behind Israel's hatred for UNRWA. As many as 750,000 Palestinians were displaced by Israeli terrorists during 1948 Nakba. Descendants of those forced to leave their native land, now called Israel, have the legal right to return to their original homes. The agency that has preserved the details of each legal registration document of these 750,000 people is UNRWA. Destroying UNRWA means Israel will never have to honor its obligation to facilitate the return of 750,000 refugees to their original land. When war criminal Netanyahu spoke at the US Congress in 2011, he told his American slaves in no uncertain term that he would not allow the descendants of those 750,000 Palestinian refugees back to their original land.
And worst of all, they continue to perpetuate the fantasy that Israel will one day be flooded by the descendants of Palestinian refugees. My friends, this must come to an end.
This is something even the BBC reporter highlighted in today's State Department press briefing.
But there is a deeper motivation for a lot of Israeli politicians, especially nationalists, who want to break the link, the historical link between Palestinian registered refugees of today and their historical dispossession in 1947, 1948, because that breaks the link between when 750,000 Palestinians fled or were forced from their homes in what is now Israel in 48, and the conflict today. So that's really important. And I just want to get a sense from you, because I don't know if we've heard an answer to this question. Do you support those Palestinians continuing to have registered refugee status?
So I can't speak to that today. I can tell you what we're focused on when it comes to UNRWA's work are the critical services that they provide. And they provide those services, as I said, in Gaza, in the West Bank, across the region, and it's critical that work to continue. Now, as to the broader question, I can take that back and get you an answer.
The Western countries' refusal to act, despite repeated violations by settler colony of Israel, is mind-boggling. That's the correct word, mind-boggling. Israeli terrorists recently announced the banning of United Nations Secretary General in Israel, meaning that he was not going to be allowed to enter Israel. They then targeted and attacked and destroyed United Nations facilities and its peacekeepers on the Lebanon border with impunity. Now they have banned an important United Nations agency, and the world is silent. The United Nations is silent. Any other country would have been decimated by now after these violations. But Israel has not even been expelled from the United Nations. It's been more than 5 months since Karim Khan submitted the request for arrest warrants of Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. And yet the ICC hasn't bothered to process that request, even though the usual time frame to process such requests is just 2 months. We are living in an insane world, with criminals and thugs calling the shots at every level in every institution in the Western world. Meanwhile, innocent Palestinians continue to be murdered in hundreds every day. That's it from me. Thank you very much for your support of this platform on buymecoffee.com and Patreon. If you too think that this platform and its journalism is worth supporting, then you too should consider becoming part of it. In the meantime, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways you can support independent journalism. God bless you all.